You're watching her celebrate another promotion while her biological clock screams in frequencies she's learned to ignore. You see her post about breaking glass ceilings while her womb remains empty by choice, not circumstance, and something primal in your DNA recoils because you recognize what she's done to herself. She's murdered the mother inside her and called it liberation. She wasn't always like this. There was a time when she held dolls and spoke to them in soft voices that came from somewhere deeper than conditioning. There was a time when she watched pregnant women with wonder instead of pity. There was a time when her body knew things her mind hadn't yet learned to doubt. But that girl was systematically dismantled by a culture that convinced her motherhood was a trap designed by patriarchal oppression to steal her dreams. Her childhood home was a battlefield between her mother's buried resentment and her father's emotional absence. She watched her mother move through the house like a prisoner serving a life sentence, whispered complaints about dreams deferred, opportunities missed, potential wasted on ungrateful children who would eventually leave anyway. She absorbed every sigh, every martyred silence, every bitter comment about what could have been if only she hadn't gotten pregnant so young. Her father reinforced the lesson through his absence. Work was where real life happened. Home was just the place where you recovered from the important things. Children were expenses, interruptions, complications that made real achievement harder to attain. Love was performance-based, conditional, something you earned through accomplishments that could be measured and compared. Emotional needs were weaknesses to be overcome, not human requirements to be met. So she learned early that survival meant rejecting everything that made her female, that safety lived in masculine achievements, masculine independence, masculine emotional detachment. She learned that her body's wisdom was society's conspiracy, that her maternal instincts were evolutionary mistakes in a modern world that no longer needed them. She learned that wanting children was internalized oppression, that nurturing was weakness, that the very essence of her biological purpose was a lie designed to limit her potential. The programming began in childhood, but crystallized in college. Professors who had never held their own children taught her that motherhood was intellectual suicide. Women's studies courses that turned biological reality into social construction. Academic feminists who spoke of pregnancy like it was a disease, of children like they were parasites, of maternal love like it was Stockholm Syndrome. She absorbed lectures about how the nuclear family was a patriarchal invention designed to enslave women, how maternal instincts were manufactured by capitalism to create unpaid domestic labor, how her uterus was a battleground in a war against her liberation. She watched her successful female professors, bitter, childless, alone in their 50s, and mistook their isolation for enlightenment. She saw their empty offices decorated with awards instead of family photos and called it achievement. She heard them speak about children with the same disdain they reserved for Republican voters and conservative ideology. And she learned that intellectual superiority meant rejecting the very biological functions that created every human being who ever lived, including themselves. The feminist doctrine wasn't just anti-motherhood, it was anti-feminine. It taught her that everything distinctly female was either oppression or evolutionary baggage. Her nurturing instincts were societal programming. Her desire for emotional connection was weakness. Her biological capacity to create life was a limitation that prevented her from accessing real power, which conveniently was defined as everything men traditionally did. She learned to see her own gender as defective masculinity rather than its own unique form of human expression. You think you're dating an evolved woman. You tell yourself she's everything feminism promised: independent, ambitious, free from traditional constraints. But you're actually sleeping with someone who's at war with her own DNA, someone who's spent so long suppressing her maternal instincts that she can no longer access the parts of herself designed to create and sustain life. She's not empowered. She's emotionally amputated. Watch how she responds to children, not the performance she puts on for social media, but the involuntary reactions when she thinks no one is looking, the way she stiffens when babies cry, the way she talks about children as lifestyle choices rather than human beings, the way she describes motherhood like it's a career suicide, a trap, a reduction of her worth rather than an expansion of her purpose. Her body produces oxytocin when she holds infants, but she's trained her mind to interpret those feelings as manipulation, biological tricks, trying to derail her professional trajectory. Notice how she speaks about pregnant women, the subtle condescension masked as concern, the way she talks about pregnancy like it's a disability, childbirth like it's medical trauma, child rearing like it's intellectual imprisonment. She's convinced herself that women who choose motherhood are either victims of false consciousness or too weak to pursue real achievement. She can't acknowledge that creating and nurturing human life might be more challenging, more rewarding, more meaningful than anything her corporate hierarchy could ever offer. She doesn't realize that by rejecting motherhood, she's rejecting the most powerful expression of feminine energy that exists. She doesn't understand that the very instincts she's suppressing are what make her capable of deep love, nurturing relationships, and emotional wisdom that transcends academic achievement. She's traded her birthright for corporate validation, her biological purpose for performance reviews that will be forgotten within months of her retirement. The men she chooses reflect her internal confusion. She gravitates toward emotionally unavailable partners because available men trigger her fear of vulnerability. She needs men who won't expect her to access the nurturing parts of herself she's spent decades destroying. She needs relationships that mirror the emotional sterility she's created in every other area of her life. She mistakes emotional distance for respect, commitment phobia for strength, their inability to want children from her as acceptance of her choices rather than indifference to her value. When she does encounter men who want families, her reaction reveals everything. She doesn't just reject their desire for children, she's offended by it. She interprets their biological drive to reproduce as evidence of their primitive thinking, their unwillingness to see her as more than a breeding vessel, their failure to appreciate her professional accomplishments. She can't understand that a man who wants children with her might be expressing the highest form of commitment possible, the desire to create permanent bonds through shared DNA to build a legacy that outlasts both their individual lives, to love her so completely that he wants to see what their combined genetics might produce. Instead, she screens for men who share her rejection of biological reality, men who've also been convinced that parenthood is optional, that legacy is irrelevant, that the continuation of human civilization is someone else's responsibility. She finds partners who are just as disconnected from their evolutionary purpose as she is from hers. Together, they create relationships built on mutual denial, two people pretending that their biological drives don't exist, that their genetic programming is irrelevant, that they can find fulfillment in achievements that will disappear the moment they stop breathing. And you, if you want children, you become the enemy, the oppressor trying to trap her in biological servitude, the patriarch attempting to reduce her to a breeding vessel. She can't hear your desire for family as love because she's been programmed to interpret male desire for children as male desire for control. She can't understand that you want to build something beautiful together because she sees creation as destruction, legacy as limitation, the future as a threat to her present achievements. But watch what happens when she hits 35, when her friends start posting pregnancy announcements and baby pictures, while she posts another business trip selfie. Watch the micro expressions when she's around families, the involuntary longing she quickly suppresses, the ache in her eyes when she holds someone else's newborn. Her body hasn't forgotten what her mind rejected. Her hormones haven't evolved past the need to nurture. Her DNA still carries the blueprint for motherhood, even though she's spent years trying to rewrite the code. The biological reality becomes impossible to ignore. Her fertility declining with each passing month, her eggs aging regardless of how many spin classes she takes, how many promotions she earns, how much Botox she injects into her face. Time doesn't negotiate with feminist theory. Biology doesn't care about her career timeline. Evolution doesn't pause for professional development plans. Her body operates on schedules that predate corporate culture by millions of years, and those schedules don't accommodate her choice to delay reproduction for LinkedIn achievements. She starts noticing things she used to dismiss, the way pregnant women glow with something she's never experienced, the depth of love in mothers' eyes when they look at their children, the sense of purpose that seems to radiate from women who've discovered their biological calling. She begins to suspect that motherhood might offer something her corner office never could, a reason to exist that extends beyond her own ambitions, a love so profound it transforms not just her life, but her very identity. But she's trapped by the ideology she internalized. Admitting that she wants children would mean acknowledging that everything she was taught about female liberation was wrong. It would mean accepting that her professors lied, that her feminist heroes were selling a philosophy designed to make women miserable, that the very movement claiming to empower her actually disconnected her from her greatest source of power. It would mean recognizing that she spent her 20s and 30s running away from the one experience that could have made her truly happy. She tells herself she's happy. That freedom feels better than responsibility. That career success provides more meaning than creating and raising human beings. But late at night, when the office achievements feel hollow and the apartment feels empty, something in her chest constricts with a grief she can't name. She's mourning the children she'll never have, while telling herself she never wanted them anyway. The pharmaceutical companies profit from her confusion. Birth control that suppresses not just ovulation, but the hormonal cycles that create maternal desire. Antidepressants that numb the existential emptiness that comes from rejecting biological purpose. Fertility treatments that promise to extend her reproductive window indefinitely, as if technology could override evolutionary biology, as if her eggs could remain viable forever, Just because her career isn't ready for interruption, she becomes a consumer of solutions to problems created by her own choices. Therapy to address the depression that comes from living against her nature. Self-help books about finding meaning in meaningless achievements. Meditation apps to quiet the inner voice that whispers about missed opportunities and wasted fertility. She pays thousands of dollars to manage the psychological symptoms of rejecting her biological design, never questioning whether the real solution might be surrendering to the very instincts she's been taught to suppress. The tragedy isn't just personal, it's civilizational. She represents the endpoint of a culture that convinced women their highest purpose was mimicking men rather than embodying their own unique power. She's the product of generations of feminist messaging that taught women to see their reproductive capacity as bondage rather than the literal source of human continuity. She's not just choosing career over maternity, she's choosing extinction over existence, performance over purpose, achievement over meaning. Her childlessness becomes a form of genetic suicide. All the wisdom she could have passed down, all the love she could have shared, all the potential human beings who could have emerged from her DNA, erased, not by tragedy or medical impossibility, but by ideology. She's eliminating her own bloodline in service to a philosophy that will be forgotten within decades, sacrificing permanent legacy for temporary validation. The feminist movement promised her equality, but delivered something far more sinister: the complete erasure of feminine value. Instead of teaching her that creating life was equal in importance to any male achievement, feminism taught her that male achievements were the only ones worth pursuing. Instead of elevating the unique powers of womanhood, it convinced her that womanhood was inferior to manhood. Instead of expanding her options, it eliminated the one option that could have provided genuine fulfillment: becoming fully woman through the experience of motherhood. You can't fix her because she doesn't think she's broken. She thinks she's enlightened, evolved, free from the biological programming that enslaved her ancestors. She doesn't realize that by rejecting motherhood, she's rejecting the deepest source of feminine wisdom, the most profound expression of female power, the one experience that could transform her from a woman playing at being a man into a woman who understands why she was born female in the first place. Her career will end, her achievements will be forgotten, her independence will become isolation. But the children she could have created, the legacy she could have built, the love she could have embodied through nurturing new life, that absence will echo through eternity. She's not just childless, she's purposeless. And the worst part is, she doesn't even know what she's lost because she was taught to see loss as liberation. When she's 50 and her colleagues have moved on to younger, hungrier versions of herself, when her body can no longer produce the life she spent decades rejecting, when her achievements feel meaningless without anyone to inherit them, she'll finally understand what real feminism was supposed to protect: her right to become fully woman, not her obligation to become a defective man. But by then, it will be too late. The window for motherhood will have closed. The chance to transform from someone who consumes resources into someone who creates human beings will have passed. The opportunity to experience the deepest love possible, the love between mother and child, will have been sacrificed for quarterly performance reviews and promotion ceremonies that no one will remember a decade later. She's not choosing career over maternity. she's choosing death over life, and she's doing it while believing she's choosing freedom over oppression, when in reality, she's choosing the deepest possible form of self-denial over the most profound expression of self-actualization that biology offers her gender. The irony is devastating. The same movement that claimed to liberate women convinced them that their most powerful capability, creating and nurturing human life, was actually their greatest weakness. It taught them that the very thing that makes them irreplaceable was what made them oppressed. It convinced them that rejecting their biological gifts was the path to equality, when in reality, it was the path to becoming inferior versions of men rather than superior versions of themselves. You think you're dating a strong woman, but strength isn't rejecting your nature. Strength is embodying it so completely that you transform not just yourself, but the next generation through the power of your love, your wisdom, your uniquely feminine capacity to create and sustain life. She's not strong. She's scared. Scared of the very thing that would make her most powerful. And that fear is exactly why she'll never be a real mother, even if she eventually changes her mind. Because real motherhood requires surrender to forces bigger than individual. It requires ambition, trusting biological wisdom over cultural messaging. It requires choosing love over achievement, purpose over performance, creation over consumption. It requires becoming the very thing she's spent her entire adult life trying not to be: fully, unapologetically, powerfully female. Real motherhood isn't just biological, it's spiritual. It's the ultimate expression of feminine strength, not because it's easy, but because it requires every form of courage that exists. Physical courage to endure pregnancy and childbirth, emotional courage to love someone more than yourself, psychological courage to shape a human soul, intellectual courage to guide developing minds, spiritual courage to accept responsibility for another person's existence. She's rejected all of it, not because she's strong enough to choose something better, but because she's too weak to embrace something so demanding, so transformative, so completely outside her control. Motherhood would require her to surrender the illusion that she's the center of her own universe, and she's too narcissistic to make that sacrifice. It would require her to accept that some forms of meaning transcend personal achievement, and she's too selfish to acknowledge anything beyond her own ambitions. The little girl who once cradled dolls and dreamed of babies grew up to become the woman who cradles smartphones and dreams of corner offices. She traded her womb for a briefcase and called it progress. But deep in her cellular memory, her body still remembers what she was designed to do, and that remembering will haunt her long after her last performance review, her final promotion, her retirement party that celebrates decades of productivity while mourning a lifetime of missed purpose. She chose career over maternity because she was taught that maternity was the enemy of achievement, when in reality, maternity is the highest achievement possible for her gender. And now, she's neither a successful career woman nor a fulfilled mother. She's a living contradiction, a walking compromise, a woman who became so afraid of limitation that she limited herself to everything except what would have made her truly unlimited: the infinite capacity for love that only motherhood can unlock. You deserved a woman who understood that creating life is more important than climbing ladders. Instead, you got someone who's climbing toward nothing while running from everything that could have made her whole. Someone who mistakes busyness for purpose, achievement for meaning, independence for strength. Someone who will spend her entire life trying to fill a void that can only be filled by the children she refused to have. Maybe she'll read this and feel that familiar anger rising, the defensive rage that protects her from acknowledging what she's lost. Maybe she'll dismiss it as patriarchal propaganda designed to shame women back into traditional roles. But somewhere in that anger is grief. Grief for the mother she could have been. Grief for the children she'll never hold. Grief for the purpose she traded for productivity. And that grief will follow her into every achievement, every promotion, every moment of supposed liberation, whispering the truth she's too afraid to hear, that she was designed for something infinitely more meaningful than anything her career could ever provide. The tragedy is complete. She sacrificed everything that could have made her immortal for achievements that will die with her. She chose temporary validation over permanent legacy. She picked sterile success over fertile love. She selected artificial purpose over biological calling. And she did it all while believing she was making the empowered choice, when in reality, she was making the most disempowered choice possible. The choice to deny her own nature in service to an ideology that sees her gender as defective rather than divine. She'll never be a real mother because she'll never understand what real motherhood means. And you'll never have the family you deserve if you stay with someone who sees your desire for children as oppression rather than the deepest expression of love possible between a man and woman who want to create something eternal together. This isn't about returning to some imaginary past where women had no choices. This is about recognizing that some choices lead to fulfillment while others lead to emptiness. Some paths honor human nature while others war against it. Some decisions create legacy while others ensure extinction. She made her choice. The question is, will you make yours?